here today at Sunrise Farms, and we're here today with Brittany Davis. She is an equine nutritionist. Welcome, Brittany, and just wondered if you could give us some of your background in education and how you got into this.
Well, I got into riding when I was about 6 years old. I started off in dressage, and then I started working at the racetrack as an exercise rider in the summers when I was 14, so that kind of got me interested in the horse racing industry as a whole. I did a diploma in equine science through the University of Guelph, and my undergrad focus was in biomedical sciences. And then went on to the research side of things and have a master's degree in equine science from the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And then I graduated in 2019 and I started my own business working with equine nutrition, and I also dabble a bit with biomechanics.
Wow, you have been busy. And you got all that done just before COVID. So
I opened right before COVID, so it has been interesting.
Oh, well, that's great. You're certainly the right person to talk to then. You know about the racehorse industry and nutrition, obviously. So what are some signs of a horse being appropriately fed versus one who is receiving poor nutrition?
When you have a horse that's not receiving everything that their body needs, they could have a dull coat. Often you'll see they kind of are a bit lethargic. They don't have the energy they need to. They're maybe not maintaining gaits and kind of dying out from under your leg. You can have poor hoof growth. If it's been more of a longer term thing. It mostly just shows up in attitude. They can have trouble maintaining weight or muscling, especially along that top line. Whereas a horse that is getting all the building blocks that their body needs generally keeps muscle really well. They're good condition. You get that really nice healthy coat, and you don't need oil to get those really glossy coats. If they're getting all the vitamins and minerals they need, they're going to have that nice glossy coat to them. And you're going to have good quality hoof.
Right. What are the key points in formulating and balancing a diet?
The first thing first is you want to have good quality hay. Hay is the foundation of a horse's diet, hay or in the summer pasture. It's what they're designed to consume through most of the day. From there, you look at what your hay is missing, and you find, you kind of fill in the holes with a vitamin mineral supplement that fits that profile. Hay, unfortunately, in pasture is nutritionally incomplete. It is missing certain vitamins and minerals. It just depends what's in your soil for where the hay was grown or where the pasture is grown. So that is the foundation first, is a hay and a good vitamin mineral supplement or a ration balancer. Often most horses, and kind of your more pleasure horses, they don't need a full complete feed, because the feeding rate for a complete feed is typically 4 to 6 pounds, some are 6 to 8 pounds. A kind of pleasure horse that's not in high level competition doesn't necessarily need that. So they only really need kind of either just a small amount of a vitamin mineral mix or a ration balancer, which is about 1 to 2 pounds of feed. And then from there, if you're still missing something, say you need a joint supplement or you want to add a little bit of oil or they need something else, then you can add it in, but always start with your hay and your vitamin mineral mix and your salt. You should always have salt.
Always have salt. Why is it important to test hay, and how does someone test their hay?
Yes. So testing hay it's something that I see done more and more now, which is a really good thing, because as I said, hay is nutritionally incomplete. So it usually contains only about 1/3 of the phosphorus that your horse actually needs, between 1/3 and 1/2. Here in Alberta, we tend to get really high calcium, which means that you can have an imbalance in your calcium phosphorus ratio that is actually outside of the safe zone. If it's really, really high in calcium and there's not a lot of phosphorus, the horse's body is not actually going to be able to, if the calcium's kind of block the absorption of the phosphorus, and then they're getting even less. Other minerals that were really kind of low in hays in general are your copper and your zinc, especially. Can be your manganese. Ones that all hays tend to have really more than sufficient amounts are more your irons, your potassium, and your magnesium. So testing that hay and seeing what you're deficient in and where your calcium phosphorus ratios are, and there's also an important ratio between the copper and zinc, seeing where that is, and then finding a vitamin mineral mix or ration balancer that complements that hay, fills in what you're missing, but doesn't give tons of extras that you don't need.
Right.
It'll save you money too if you don't need to double up on nutrients with like a high iron supplement when you have high iron in your hay. You can just save yourself the money on that and find something that doesn't necessarily have that. That is kind of the important part. So seeing what your hay has as well for protein levels, your fiber levels, and more important for Standardbreds, your sugar levels. Because, and I know we'll get into this later about insulin resistance and equine metabolic syndrome, but seeing where those sugar levels are in your hay is extremely important to managing health conditions like that. So we did take some video of hay testing. I like to use a drill powered hay core just because it's quicker, but there are push kind or hand crank kinds that you can use. You want to sample about 20 bales per hay lot randomly throughout the entire stack of hay, and that'll give you the best representative sample to see what is actually in your hay, and then you can send that off to your hay analysis lab. It helps to use an NFTA certified lab. They're third-party certified for quality, and if you can find one of those to send it to, it's better than one that is not NFTA. That's National Forage Testing Association. They're held to a different quality standard, and they're actually sent blind samples about 6 times a year and compared and graded on how accurate their testing is.
Right. And where do we find one?
You can Google the National Forage Testing Association, and they have a listing of all the labs that participate in their program worldwide.
Okay, good to know.
All right, when sampling your hay, you want to take as many representative cores as possible. So ideally 20 core samples throughout the entire stack. When you're sampling through square bales, you want to go in through the end of the bale and get across as many layers as possible so that your final sample is as representative as possible. When sampling round bales, you want to go straight into the center of the core. You don't want to be on an angle to make sure that you get across as many layers of the round bale as possible so your sample is as representative as possible. Once you're done collecting your samples, you should have about a pound's worth of hay. When you use a hay core like this, you get a good ratio of stem and leaf. Whereas if you're doing hand grab samples, you tend to lose a lot of the leaf where a lot of the nutrients are. So then that's not as accurate for testing. Make sure that you mix up your sample before you send it off to the lab. Not all labs will properly mix and grind your whole sample before testing. If you use an NFTA, that's National Forage Testing Association accredited lab, it's a third-party certification program that rates labs' accuracy and blind tests them 6 times a year with samples so that you know that you're using a lab that uses gold standard practices.
How do you body condition score a horse, and what is the ideal body condition score?
I use the Henneke scoring system, which is on a 1 to 9. There is also a 1 to 5 scale, but I do prefer the 1 to 9. And you're looking at their kind of fat and muscle deposits along the crest of their neck, kind of in behind the wither, behind their kind of elbow shoulder area, along the crease of their back and over their tail head, and then along the ribs. And you're palpating these areas to see, for the ribs you should be able to feel them, but not necessarily see them for that kind of ideal 5, but for your pleasure horses you can be 5 to 6, somewhere in that range is ideal. And you just, we will be body condition scoring some horses here in a bit, so I can show you once I actually have a horse. But it is a great way to monitor your horse's weight and ensure that they're keeping sufficient condition. It's helpful to body condition score them kind of weekly so you can see if they're maybe losing a little bit of weight or gaining a little too much and you need to back up on the treats a little bit. Or, you know, with the pasture growing right now, it's really rich. You can make sure they're not gaining too much weight out of pasture, and it's a great way to help kind of keep an eye on your horse's weight without actually having to weigh them.
Yeah, that's difficult.
Yeah, a little bit, yes.
When you're body condition scoring a horse, you want to look at kind of, you want some nice firm fat, but not like a big crusty, bumpy neck here. And you can feel there's no filling in of fat here, so we're not over a 6 on this horse. We can't see the rib, but I can easily feel the rib without having to push down. There's no soft or spongy fat on top of it, so those I can feel comfortably. Looking behind the shoulder and the elbow here, we don't have any bulging fat filling in, so again, we're not above a body condition score of a 6, but we can't, with not seeing the ribs, we're not below a 4 on this horse. It's a little bit hard to see from here, but we're not, there's no negative crease down the back like you would see in a heavier horse. It's a little bit more kind of like that, so that's not a bad thing. It's a little bit lean. And then, yeah.
Bring him back.
I know.
Come here, buddy.
The cameras. Oh, the cameras. Who's the strange person? And then around the tail head, we don't have any spongy or soft fat pads. It's there, so I would give this horse actually a body condition score of just a lean 5, I would say. So a 5 is kind of between a 5 and a 6 is ideal. This horse is very nearly there. I think a 5 is a lot leaner than a lot of people think, because we tend to like to see our horses a little bit more on the cushy side, because then we feel like we're giving them enough food and we feel like we're being good owners by having kind of a slightly fluffier horse. But for horses, it's not a good thing to be too heavy, and I know that we'll be seeing that in another horse here, but I do think this horse is in a really good kind of lean 5. We just need a little bit of muscle buildup, but that's something that will come with exercise. We're here with our next horse. The fat crest here is a little bit bigger than the last horse that we saw, but we're still fairly firm. You don't want that to be soft and squishy where you can move it if you think of kind of a big crest on a foundered horse, where it's really soft and mobile, so we're still really firm here. There is a thing called a crusty neck score. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but you can look up the scoring. It's kind of a 0 to 5 thing. So we're still below a 3, which is, it's good. We're getting a little bit more fill in behind the withers here than the last horse, and also a little bit more fill in kind of behind the shoulder elbow area, but not too much. We can't see the rib, but they're still, I can still feel them, not as easy.
Watch yourself.
Yeah.
Don't
Hey, bud.
It's okay, don't bite me. Okay. Okay, good.
Can still feel them, not as easy on the last horse, but it's still, there is a little bit of kind of fat fill in between the ribs, but it's kind of firm. It's not super soft and squishy jello. The back is more flat. We don't have that negative crease where the, you know, that kind of heart-shaped thumb or fat deposit. And then, sorry, but yeah, we've got a little bit more fat fill in kind of at the tail head here, but it's still not soft and squishy. It's a little more kind of firm, spongy. So I would give this horse a body condition score of 6. You want your horse between kind of that first horse we saw and this horse. As long as you're in that range, you're in a good, healthy body condition score. We're here with our next horse. So you can see with the crest, it's a lot thicker and firmer. It's probably hard to see on with the camera, but it does kind of bulge out along the crest here. So I'd give her the cresty neck score kind of closer to 3. We have a lot more fill in behind the withers here, but it's still kind of a firmer fat. It's not a really soft, squishy fat. Oh, sorry, girlie. Yeah, I've got to push a lot harder to be able to feel those ribs. And the fat fill-in between the ribs is getting soft now. We've also got more fat fill-in here behind the shoulder blade. We are starting to get that negative crease along the back, where we're not a positive crease is kind of where the spinal processes stick up a little bit, whereas the negative crease is where there's fat padding on either side of the spinal processes that stick above the spine. So we are starting to get a negative crease on there. So we are above a body condition of 6 for sure. And then the tail head fat is getting a little bit softer than the last horse. So I would give her probably a 7.5. We're not quite a full 8 because I can still feel the ribs a bit, but we are definitely, she could use a little more exercise.
Are there special guidelines or considerations for feeding the off-the-track horse as they transition to a pleasure horse?
Yeah, so the off-the-track horses, they're coming from typically a very calorie-dense feed to power, that high performance that they're expected to have. There tend to be a lot of concentrates in that feed. That can be hard to kind of come off of for the horses. Well, they love their oats.
Yes, they do.
You do want to ideally try and transition them slower and kind of cut that down, but I'm not a big fan of feeding the horses a lot of grain still while you're kind of transitioning them off that diet. So if you can cut that down over a couple of days, it makes it, while you're increasing your forage types. Yes. That kind of is easier on the digestive system. It's not great to just one day they're getting 2 quarts of oats and the next day they're not. It can be a bit of a shock to the system. So if you can spread that out over a couple of days, it's a little bit easier. The horse's digestive system adapts to feed changes and to forage quality changes very, very slowly because they are hindgut fermenters. They have that microbiome of bacteria in the hindgut, and those bacteria populations change slowly. So it takes time, and those rapid changes can kind of shock that bacterial population in the hindgut, and you can get things like diarrhea, or you can go the other way and you increase your colic risk in some horses that are really sensitive to those rapid changes. So trying to make that diet adjustment slower over a couple of days is a lot easier on their system. I do normally say about a week to 2 weeks, but I find that's a really long time to have horses still on oats when they're not in that level of training. So if we can get them off the oats in about a week, that would be really kind of the best thing for them without shocking that bacterial population in their hindgut, and it just makes everything a little bit easier. It isn't a kind of a change for them, but I find that they do adapt to kind of that forage, majority diet pretty easy. It is how horses were designed. So, yeah.
They certainly love going out onto the grass and not having to work that hard anymore.
Yes.
What is the best way to feed rescue types with low body condition score?
Yeah. Those really skinny kind of starvation rescue cases. The University of California has done some studies on refeeding, and they've looked at hay with grains, hay with oil, hay alone. And what they found is the best and safest way to get that weight back on a horse is straight alfalfa, no grains, no oils, no anything else. And you have to do it very, very slowly. So those starvation cases, when we're talking body condition scores of like 1, 2, you can see all the bones, they're just heartbreaking.
Yes.
They've been in that condition for so long that their bodies actually started eating into even the muscle around their intestines. Their body can't handle a lot of feed all at once. I know everyone wants to just throw as much groceries as you can, just give them the whole bag of feed, it's tempting. but you don't want to shock their system because it has been in starvation mode for so long. So what the UC Davis refeeding guidelines are, you start with 1 pound of hay every 3 to 4 hours. So for 6 feedings in a day, it's going to be 6 pounds of hay, which I know doesn't sound like a lot.
It isn't much, but yeah.
I guarantee you it is a lot more than they have seen in weeks.
Right.
But you can't shock their system. It's very precarious. They're very deficient on essential vitamins and minerals that are used in that digestive process. And giving them kind of a bunch of feed at once can actually kind of mess up their electrolyte balance, and you run into something called refeeding syndrome, which can actually result in death about 3 to 5 days after that initial feed. So if you kind of dump a bunch of, say senior feed in there for them and they gorge themselves, it can actually result in death 3 to 5 days later because it shocks the system so much. So it's
and we always think, well, they're eating it, they must want it, so I'll give you more.
And they will, but so to start off slowly for the first 3 days, 6 feeds per day, 1 pound per feed. It gradually introduces hay back in there. It allows that microbiome to build those gut bacteria back up. You're not shocking their system. And also with feeding them, high grains or sugars to try and get calories into them, it can cause massive spikes in their blood sugar and glucose and insulin levels that can actually result in laminitis or colic.
Right.
By shocking that system. From days 4 to 10, you're going to build up to about 13 pounds of hay slowly and reduce your feeding frequency to 3 times a day. So it's only the first 3 days are really intensive.
Right. Okay.
And then from there, free access alfalfa hay, not grass hay, alfalfa hay for this whole thing. Free access as much as they want. And it's going to be like that for several weeks to months until you can start looking at adding grains in within 4 to 8 weeks. But you do want this horse seen by a vet as well to make sure that there's not other things going on. You're going to want a dental done. Who knows when that was last done?
Yeah. No sense feeding them if their teeth can't do it. Are there special considerations with horses with GI issues?
Yes, what you can get on the track are things like ulcers. We hear that a lot, those high sugar and starch feeds. It's not as common as, say, the thoroughbreds, which are really prone to getting those ulcers, those racing thoroughbreds, but you still can get ulcers. So when you're taking those off-track horses and transitioning them to a pleasure lifestyle, you could be dealing with ulcers. What you want to do is feed a pound or 2 of hay before you ride. It creates a grass mat on top of the acid in the stomach and helps prevent that acid splash up into the fundic region of the stomach, which is where you're kind of prone to develop ulcers, and helps kind of control that stomach acid in there so they're not aggravating the condition and it can start to heal. You may need to talk to your vet about having them on some sort of gastric aid while you're in there. But yeah, it's give them hay. Hay is the solution. Hay or pasture is the solution to everything.
Feeding guidelines for common standardbred special dietary needs like EMS and IR.
Yeah, so as we touched on earlier, equine metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance is a bit more common in these standardbred horses. And I think almost every single pleasure horse standardbred that I work with is insulin resistant. I don't know what it is, but, well, no, I do. The breed is predisposed to being a little more easy keeper. So they keep a weight a little bit better, and it seems to correlate with developing equine metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance, especially if they're getting really rich pasture or a lot of additional feeds. They can get up into that 7-8 body condition score, which does drastically increase the risk of developing insulin resistance. If you do have an insulin resistance, you can get that laminitis and founder. So what you need is hay that is tested low sugar. So on your hay analysis, you're going to have like an as sampled column and a dry matter column. It's easier if you have it's non-structural carbohydrates, or NSC, below 12%. Not all hay tests have that, some have it as starch and then water-soluble carbohydrates separate. So your non-structural carbohydrates are your starch and your water-soluble carbohydrates added together. That is your non-structural carbohydrates. So under 12%. And then, of course, no grains. Probably not going to be able to go on past your...
Right.
You're going to unfortunately have to watch that. And you do have to watch the sugary treats.
Yeah, which is tough.
It is. I don't like being the treat police
I
for
know,
all my
I know.
metabolic clients, but it is what's best for them.
Yeah, it is. Supplements. What is actually needed and what works? There's so many out there.
There are. You go to any feed store and it's just row upon row upon row of different supplements for every condition
Every little thing. Yes.
and possible deficiency. Your horse doesn't need 99% of that stuff. Outside of, the hay, the vitamin mineral mix, and your salt, most horses don't need anything else. They honestly really don't.
Mm-hmm.
As long as that vitamin mineral mix is filling in all the missing, deficiencies there, your horse is getting everything they need. They really don't. For the older guys, you can get into a joint supplement. You want something that has the hyaluronic acid, glucosamine, MSM, and chondroitin sulfate kind of all together. A lot of supplements, are one or two of those, a couple other things, but something that kind of has all four of those tends to work a little better, but it is really hit and miss.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so much out there. Working with a independent nutritionist like myself, I can give you an unbiased view of what will and won't be a good idea for your horse. Whereas if you're talking to a nutritionist that works for a supplement company, they're going to push that product.
Right.
Being independent, I'm not associated with any feed or supplement companies, so I can really give you that unbiased third-party view and work with what your horse actually needs for their situation in life.
That's good to know. How are dental care, deworming, and farrier care related to nutrition?
Yeah. So dental care, extremely important.
Yes.
Those teeth do so much work when they are eating that hay and actually grinding it down. So making sure that those teeth, you don't have any, broken or missing ones, or if they are, they're, treated properly. You're not getting any sharp spikes in there or waves or ripples. So working with a veterinarian, especially when that is has a special interest in dentistry and has done additional training in dentistry, is so beneficial. The more they can grind up that hay properly, the more surface area you get on that hay, and then the more those bacteria colonies are able to access all those little particles to digest them and break them down for you. And then for dewormers, those worms do leach nutrients from the horse, right? They kind of vary into the tissues, and they can, in some cases, if you have a really heavy worm load, you can actually get impaction issues in the horse, which can lead to colic. So working with your vet and doing fecal sampling to see what worms your horse actually has, and you may need to get into what dewormers they're kind of resistant to, because dewormer resistance is a growing problem. So working with your vet for what works in your area and what their problems are seen in your area, and doing fecal testing is really the best way to make sure that you're managing those parasite loads in that horse. Hoof quality, especially when you're having those rescue horses, they're going to have poor hoof. And it takes forever for hooves to actually grow out. So when you have them, if you have them on a balanced diet, or if you have them on a hoof supplement, it can take 6 months to a year to see the results of that. Once that hoof grows out, it's frustrating.
Yeah.
I know, it's a very, very slow process, but you have to be patient with that before you actually see the benefit and see that healthier horn growth that's actually finally down where you can trim it. And your farrier will be the one that can actually help you in that as well. And if, for those rescue types too, if they're really sensitive on the soles, don't have thick frogs or calluses if they maybe need special shoeing. But it's the hoof quality can tell you a lot about if they're missing certain vitamins, minerals, and proteins, because that horn is composed of proteins, right? It's kind of the same as our hair. It's a lot of keratin and things in there. So you need your lysine and your methionine and your other essential amino acids in there to build that proper keratin protein structure that is composed of the composes the hoof. Just takes forever to grow out. I wish there was some supplement on the market that you could give it to them and 2 weeks later, boom, you have perfect toes, but fortunately not. It is a patience game.
Yeah. All right, that's great.
I guess
How does nutrition play into bone growth and development in young horses?
So the bones require really good calcium, phosphorus, and some protein in there to properly form. They are mostly calcium and phosphorus, the actual bone structure. And you can run into developmental orthopedic diseases like OCD, which is osteochondrosis dissecans. It's kind of little lesions that you get, especially on those joint surfaces in there. You can get angular and flexural limb deformities, where you have the limbs that are kind of bending outward or twisting or different things like that. And that is typically due to one of 3 nutritional reasons. The first thing I always look at if I'm dealing with a breeding farm that's having issues is we hay test, of course, and then the first thing I look at, and my number 1 suspect, is always that calcium phosphorus ratio. The ratio window for those younger and growing horses for what they can tolerate for a calcium phosphorus ratio is a lot narrower than an adult horse. And if they're getting too much calcium, they're not getting enough phosphorus to help build that bone structure, or the other way around. If it's really high in phosphorus, they're not getting enough calcium to build that bone structure, and then the bones start to grow a little bit abnormally. So if we do have an issue there, finding the right vitamin and mineral supplement to balance out that calcium phosphorus ratio is extremely important. The other suspect is copper and zinc. So either copper and zinc deficiency or an imbalance in that copper zinc ratio as well. It works the same way as the calcium phosphorus ratio. You do need those kind of trace copper and zinc minerals in there for proper bone growth and development, and not having them, you can run into issues. And then the last one is actually the total digestible energy or calorie content in the hay. Those fast growing breeds like your warm bloods, your Standardbreds, and your thoroughbreds that are meant to grow really big, really fast. It takes a lot of nutrition, but if they're growing too big and too fast because they're on really rich feed, the bones can't lay down enough mineral to keep up with that growth. So it starts laying it down kind of uneven, and you get those bone and joint abnormalities that you deal with in OCD and DOD. So backing up on that high calorie feed a little bit to control that growth rate and keep it a little more moderate. It's not going to affect their overall end height in the long run. You're just making so they're not going through these massive growth spurts and the bone can't keep up with them.
Okay. There's a lot in that subject.
There is a lot.
You do need to do some research and get the help of someone like you.
Yes.
To help.
And test your hay.
Yes.
Knowing what your horse is actually getting is so important to knowing what they're missing and what kind of issues could develop from that. So
Yeah, and it starts right with that pregnant mare.
Yes, it does. Those bones and all those muscle and organ systems are developing in utero. So feeding your mare right from the get-go can also help improve the fertility of your mare, so that you are getting the best chances of conception. You're giving the mare everything she needs to grow that foal well in her womb, and then through nursing once it's born, and the food that the hay and the minerals that you supply to those foals, so they're getting everything their body needs to grow and to develop properly, so that they can have the best chances of success as a performance horse and a companion horse in the future.
Great. What's your client base and where are they all located?
My client base is very diverse. I have everything from breeding farms to Pre-St. George dressage horses, to pleasure horses, retired horses, and just a lot of your kind of amateur, occasionally compete horses, warm bloods, thoroughbreds, standardbreds, ponies. I have a nice range of everything, and I really enjoy the diversity because they all have different needs. Now my clients, because I work remotely from home a lot, my clients are actually currently spread out from BC to Ontario, and I really do enjoy kind of that diversity with everyone. I get a lot of clients referred to me as well through different vet clinics in the province for kind of more complex nutritional issues that, because the vets do have kind of a somewhat foundation of nutrition, but not as detailed. They don't have the ability to do as detailed nutritional evaluation and diet formulation.
They don't have the time.
They don't have the time. They've got so many other things to do.
Yeah.
So they will send clients to me with kind of what the issue is, what needs to be done. I look at the diet, I formulate something that balances everything. I run it all through my software, and then I give that diet plan to the owner, and it's completely customized on what the horse needs.
At whatever stage they are.
Whatever stage of life they are, whatever performance level or companion level they're at, their breed, just it is very individualized.
Good to know, good to know. These are a few additional questions that we had sent in. What is the difference between a complete feed, a ration balancer, or a vitamin mineral mix?
It's the concentration of nutrients in them and the feeding rate. So when you're looking at between those and trying to decide, pay attention to what the feeding rate is on the label. Your complete feeds are generally a fairly high feeding rate, 4 to 6 pounds. Some go up even to 10 pounds of feeding rate. It can be 1 kilogram per 100 kilograms of body weight. So you're talking 10 pounds of feed there, and that feeding rate is there to make sure that you're getting all the vitamins and minerals that you need in that feed. It's just not as concentrated. But most of your kind of general pleasure, everyday horses, they're not competing at a level that requires, 6-8 plus pounds of feed. So then if you're feeding less because they don't need all those additional calories, you're not getting all the vitamins and minerals that you need. Whereas a ration balancer is a lot more concentrated and usually have only a pound or two before you are meeting all their nutritional vitamin mineral needs. It's a lot more condensed with less calories and can be a better option for those not as intense performance, high level competition horses, more those day-to-day horses. Your vitamin mineral mix is pretty much mostly vitamin minerals. The pelleted ones have a little bit of additional additive in there to make it pellet, but generally you're feeding kind of 100 to 200 grams. We're talking a handful, and that is all the vitamin and mineral supplement that you need, and that can be, the pelleted ones can be fed straight up as is with nothing else. The powdered kind usually needs to be mixed in with a little bit of a carrier, but not anywhere near the feeding rate of the others. So if you have a metabolic horse, like an insulin resistant horse, equine metabolic syndrome, something that you're trying to lose weight on because we are, really high 7, 8, 9 body condition score, the vitamin mineral mix is a really good idea for that horse because you're not really adding any additional calories, but they are still getting what they need to fill in those holes that are in their hay.
Good. What brands do you recommend?
It depends on the horse,
Right.
and it depends on the hay. There isn't one straight up answer for every situation. You have to really look at what that hay says it has in it, and some feeds, are higher calcium. Well, that's not so great with a high calcium hay, or the other way around. You're going to have some feeds that are really low in calcium, but then you're going to have feeds that are also really low. So that doesn't go as well. You need kind of a higher calcium feed to go with a low calcium hay to kind of balance out those ratios. So there isn't a one brand or, 2 or 3 brands that fit every situation. It really is, what does the horse need? What hay are they on, or pasture are they on? What level are they performing at? What health conditions do they have? Do they need a low sugar hay for those metabolic types, or low sugar feed for those metabolic types, and they can't be on some of those higher sugar feeds? It's so individualistic. And if you ask any brand, feed nutritionist or nutrition advisor, they're only going to recommend products within their brand,
Right.
which still might not always be the best fit. Whereas if you go with someone that's independent, I can pick the truly best fit product out of everything that is available in your area.
Yeah, and that you would take the guesswork out of it
Yes,
for us.
I do
which
take
is
the guesswork out.
Great.
I run it all through my software. You get the feed plan with exact quantities, and you should always feed by weight, not by eyeballing. There's so many scoop sizes out there. What one person considers a scoop to another person. Some people use coffee cans.
Yeah.
It's not a consistent quantity from one barn to the next, or one owner to the next, for what a scoop is. So getting a cheap kitchen scale lets you just weigh out everything, and then you know exactly what's in that and what your horse is getting. And I run it through my software. I get a graph with, so you can see that they are getting what they need on that graph, and it takes the guesswork out of it. And you're not having to guess and throwing all these different supplements in, and maybe I need to try this one, or this competitor, this, high competition person, or my vet says to feed this, and, ask 5 horse people what to feed, and you're going to get about 10 different answers.
Yes, I agree. I agree on that.
But adding too many supplements, you can actually get into toxic levels for some of those vitamins and minerals. And that's what you want to avoid. And I can take all the guesswork out of that and make sure that we are getting everything we need with nothing excessive that we don't.
And in the long run, you're going to save money.
You do save money, yes.
Yeah. There's no sense feeding something.
Yeah.
that you do not need.
If you are feeding a lot of supplements, I can probably cut out half or more of those and pay for myself in 3 months or less.
Right.
With the money saved on those. And you are getting what you need. And I do try to make diets as simple as possible. I don't like adding all these different things in that make the diet hard to feed or cost a lot of money, because then people aren't going to stick with it. And then the horse isn't going to get everything, and then the horse isn't going to have the energy to perform. It's not going to look its best. It doesn't work. If you keep the diet simple, you're more likely to stick to it. It's not going to cost you as much. It's going to be more affordable, easier to feed. It just works so much better.
Yeah, I agree. So I want to thank you today for coming out and giving us all this information. I know I am going to use it very well. And again, thank you.
Thank you for having me. I have really enjoyed being here.
Yeah.